Today I'm talking about ethical sourcing of cocoa and chocolate in Cote d'Ivoire. I'm talking to you from Abidjan, the capital city of Cote d'Ivoire, the world's first producer of cocoa. The key learning point, the first one is harvesting and growing more sustainably. And we are going to say something about the insoluble problem of deforestation. With a deforestation rate of 80 to 90%, according to experts, Cote d'Ivoire is a disaster country. The country is affected by climate change, and the seasons are unpredictable, compromising harvest and the food self-sufficiency of the population in many regions. To date, we can say that no protected area is safe from destruction in the country. One of the last one, the Majestic Thai Park, faces cocoa plantation at the very edge of some of its natural boundaries. And as soon as attention wanes, it will undoubtedly be attacked. There is an excellent agency to stop and control deforestation. It's a thorny problem in Cote d'Ivoire. The classified forests are constantly decreasing. It is a sea serpent because despite official declarations and action plans to fight deforestation, it does not stop. The Cocoa and Forest Initiative, set up at the end of 2017, does not keep its promises. And Mighty Earth, 1 year after the setup of the ICF, did an investigation in cocoa growing region, and we collected evidence of new cocoa farms in many places, including in protected areas. But the promises was, after the ICF implementation, not to implement any cocoa farms using deforestation. Unfortunately, some of the country's senior officials in charge of the fight against this phenomenon have found themselves involved in timber trafficking. When some forests are declassified locally, the village executives themselves appropriate the land without respecting the norms. Since 2018, Cote d'Ivoire has had a national strategy for preserving, rehabilitating, and extending forests called PPREF. The aim is to improve forest governance and the protection of forest areas. Since 2019, the country has also adopted a new forestry code that makes a prominent place to agroforestry to reconcile its agricultural vocation and the imperative need to restore its forest cover. On this point, the ambition is to cover 20% of the territory with forest against less than 10% right now. There is, therefore, the will to reverse the frightening curve of deforestation. However, some provision of the measures presented below could be more reassuring. For example, the country plans to grant significant forest concession to large groups that will be responsible for carrying out restoration measures at the same time as they exploit the forest in a win-win process. And that is included in the new forest code voted in 2019. However, given the traditional weakness of monitoring and evaluation, the corruption that plagued many administration sectors, and the lack of adequate independent tracking, it is to be feared that this measure will destroy the few remaining forests. This fear is genuine since the country lost from its independence in 1960 to 2015 nearly 90% of its forest, going from 16 million hectares to less than 3 million hectares, an average rate of loss of over 200,000 hectares per year. There is now little arable land. Farmers complain about the non-fertility of overexploited soils that are not regenerated. This creates pressure on protected areas and conflict over land use. Land conflict were at the heart of the civil war from 2002 to 2010 in the cocoa producing region, with some communities of cocoa farmers involved in the war with arms and fighting against government forces or rebels, depending on the situation. As far as agroforestry is concerned, The species handed over to the farmers are those most sought after by foresters. Why? In addition, the trees are planted on the edge of the plantations of the farms rather than in the farms themselves among the cocoa trees. What will be the best implementation strategy of agroforestry? In Cote d'Ivoire, wood exploitation is often done fraudulently at night. In addition, planting the species that loggers best sell along the roadside facilitate theft and transportation of the trees once they are mature. Why not give more fruit trees to contribute to the autonomy of the farmers as well as diversify and avoid pressures and conflict? Second learning point is the traceability and transparency. It is very problematic, when it comes to consider the cocoa producers. Cocoa farmers are not part of the most critical discussions impacting their work and living conditions. Decades ago, when I was a young boy, there were members of the cooperatives and could voice their concern, as in the workers' union. Unfortunately, today cooperatives are controlled primarily by business people with the cash discretion. Adding to this, the literacy of the majority and the fact that many players are unwilling in the host country adds to the fragility. It is clear, however, that only some can improve the farming situation with the full participation in all decisions involving them. A radical revision of current practices is therefore necessary. This is possible now that the Cocoa Coffee Council, CCC, has a census of all farmers and some of the farms. The Ivorian cocoa industry is rooted in opacity. There is almost no platform for discussion and multi-party exchanges, including the state, the companies, and civil society. The accountability of the sector's manager is therefore almost non-existent. It is therefore not surprising that the institutions in charge are regularly confronted with situations of mismanagement. And it has always been the case since I was a young boy. Very frequently, we have this kind of resources mismanagement, disappearance of funds. No work is given to the farmers, as we say, farmers on whom the entire sector depends. They are used to doing the most challenging part of the work and getting only crumbs. It is known that only 5 to 6% of the almost 130 billion US dollar generated annually by the chocolate industry reaches them. Yet the means exist to recognize and support them. Poor communication on agroforestry is another point. Farmers need help understanding. For example, the need to have 25 trees per hectare is announced, but some farmers only receive three trees in some region, cocoa growing region, based on discussion we recently had with them. Farmers have no power. We need to stress that even when buyers set prices below the government's decision, they are forced to accept because they can't do otherwise. They have no choice. The government sometimes knows this, but is it doing anything to remedy the situation? Not sure. Coffee and cocoa are not widely consumed in Cote d'Ivoire, and that should be very clear for everyone because it's surprisingly not the case when you are traveling to Europe or in the US. Nothing seems to be done to initiate local consumption to have a local market. Cocoa remains a luxury product for almost the vast majority of Ivorian, let's say 90% Ivorian. But we can do otherwise. For example, school canteens and other potential targets could be used to increase consumption of this product and give producers an alternative to international markets. Unfortunately, no meaningful and effective plan exists to support local consumption and entrepreneurs processing because some Ivorians are trying to produce chocolate locally. A few recommendations before closing this speech. As you noticed already, the biggest problem facing the cocoa sector in Cote d'Ivoire is good governance. It is dominated by a lack of transparency and the non-application of measures and laws. However, the context is ideal with the adoption of important decisions and laws. We already mentioned the revision of the Forestry Code in 2019, multi-annual management plans, the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, the Joint Initiative Cocoa, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, ICCIG, adopted on August 9, 2021, satellite observation that is becoming common in the country. Even many NGOs knows now how to use the data. They can connect and use some data. We now have a farm census and identification of farmers by the CCC, the Coffee Cocoa Council, the key player in the cocoa sector in Cote d'Ivoire, and a favorable international context with the new European regulations and public attention for the sector. To introduce greater transparency and collaboration, we need first to set up permanent multi-sector initiative that will include Ivorian government, the producers, sales society, and companies, and also local communities at the grassroots to monitor and evaluate the cocoa sector. We should inform, train, and provide specific support to the weakest players. I mean, the producers and civil society organizations involved in independent monitoring. These initiatives should be based on an independent assessment of the sector, the conclusions of which will be made public and the solution validated and implemented collectively and transparently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amourlaye, for your presentation. What is your background in the cocoa sector? How did you start working in that sector in particular?
Okay. I have almost 20 years of experience in human rights, election, good governance, and I started working specifically on cocoa and on the environment problems almost 6 years ago when I joined Mighty F. But when I was a human rights activist and electoral trainers, I was already, I had some interactions with this problem of cocoa farmers. During our human rights activities or electoral education, we could visit, some cocoa growing region. That was almost 20 years ago. So I already knew about this problem, but I specifically started working on cocoa sector in 2018 when I joined Mighty Earth after 2 years in the DRC.
It's a really interesting subject and certainly a very prevalent issue. Could you summarize for me the main problems that are facing cocoa farmers? Deforestation being one, of course.
We have many problems. As I mentioned during the presentation, the land use is a big problem. There is a few arable lands remaining in what used to be what you call the cocoa belt. The cocoa belt itself is moving because when there is too much exploitation of a land, it becomes poor and people will move to another part of the country. So land use is another big problem. It also, we have insecurity because cohabitation between local people and people coming from Mali, Burkina Faso, or other region of Cote d'Ivoire is not easy. We have poverty, big poverty in the farmers' community, insecurity because of that, bad pesticide use also, and to tackle poverty, for example, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana try to implement what we call living income differential. That was in 2020. Unfortunately, big companies accepted officially, but they work behind the scene to avoid the payment of this LID to poor farmers. So some of the problem are, of course, deforestation, extreme poverty, insecurity, land use, problem also, bad use of pesticide, and in some region we also have forced labor and child labor in the cocoa sector.
Yeah, you said in your presentation that the farmers have no power, which I think is a very poignant point. How are you and your work in Mighty Earth supporting these farmers? You mentioned implementing a roadmap using, an interactive map using satellites. Could you talk a bit more about how that works?
Yeah. In 2020, using the image platform, put in place after collaboration between the Ivorian government and the UK Space Agency, we could have specific information on deforestation, including the exact perimeters, because using satellite images, one can convert the pixel into numbers, hectares, etc. And the observation is just improving from a year to another. So nobody can say now, I didn't know about this deforestation, because that was happening before. During one of our investigations, we were visiting the Cavalli Forest. It's a protected area. And when you are on the main road, you can see this nice forest with big trees. But when you start, going into the forest, 200 meters, 300 meters from the main road, you will see cocoa everywhere. When we are not using satellite imaging, we cannot see that because someone who is just crossing on the main road will not see the deforestation happening, behind the big trees bordering the road. But when you go inside, you can see now with satellite imagery that is being updated every 13 to 15 years, you can have a global map, a global review of all deforestation happening. That is why we did not understand why CCC refused to collaborate. Imagine that they are sharing the data on the census of all cocoa farms, of all cocoa farmers, and the geolocation of all farmers. That will be an amazing improvement of the accountability map, because working together will be able to know that this cocoa, for traceability also, this cocoa is coming from these protected areas. It is not allowed to get cocoa in this or this specific place. So that is something that satellite imagery is a revolution, in fighting against deforestation. And hopefully, it's not only the image platform that is working now. We have a kind of competition. One problem, current Cote d'Ivoire is based on that, because other satellite providers wants to get involved, and it was said that the image platform will be just shared, and all the stakeholders will use the same tool. But until today, there is some other satellite providers competing with the image platform.
I mean, that's unbelievable to imagine that you have. I can imagine it must be really helpful to physically see how the forests are being deforested. That is sort of blows my mind a little bit. Just one final question I had for you, Amourlaye. Do you think laws and regulations help? I know that the European Union recently passed due diligence laws where companies now have to prove that their cocoa's not caused deforestation. Do you think that will have a positive impact on the sector?
Yeah, before answering your question, I just want to add regarding the satellite observation.
Of course.
We have the satellite observation, but also we have what we call the ground truthing. Based on satellite imagery, we'll also go, visit the field to confirm that it is a deforestation because of cocoa or another natural problem. Now, to answer your question, of course, It's good for the European Union to be involved in the fight against deforestation, child labor, forced labor, and poverty of farmers. That is good. It's a good regulation. But everything, as we mentioned already, should be monitored independently, by people working collaboratively, not only the government people, because we need people who will work independently and give the real situation they are finding in the field. So regulation is good. We now have a very good forestry code. We have the Cocoa Forest Initiative. We have other laws, regulations, and norms. But are they being implemented? Are the government doing what is needed to monitor, to report, and to fight against, the problem we are facing? That is the key point. So, European regulation is good, but we should work collaboratively. Europe, the US, Ivory Coast, not only official side in Ivory Coast, but also other stakeholders, including communities of farmers, cooperatives, and other stakeholders. The key point is the monitoring, because we have some official declaration, but not all what they are saying is implemented in the field.
Yeah, no, I hear it's a really good point. I hear that's a really important point that you have to make sure that it's policed. So thank you again, Amourlaye, for presenting Confectionery Live and for taking the time to share your expertise. It's been a really interesting, insightful presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin.